Why is it that all these police incidents that we see has to end in the most extreme way possible? Is it that this is normal and we're seeing it for the first time? Or is it that these events are inspired and exacerbated by recent events? For more, this is In Layman's Terms.
Michael Brown, Tamir Rice, Eric Garner, Philandro Castile, Justine Demond. These people have been in the center of national and international reactions to police brutality. With more and more cops being acquitted, the public trust in our justice system, most notably from the black community, has been eroding in recent years. So why resort to shooting people, as opposed to other and arguably non-violent methods? One of the biggest reasons is the tough-on-crime era of the 80s and 90s. This is when all the political rage was to be against criminality in some way, shape, or form. Many politicians from both sides of the aisle campaigned themselves as candidates of law and order. The promise is that dangerous criminals are stopped by any means necessary. As one could gather, this arose a problem, was that some people were considered criminals without any reason.
See, the problem arises with a mentality called implicit bias. Think of these as assumptions you and I have over certain races and stereotypes. For example, when we see a white man in a suit and he has a whole lot of money, we think success. You see this guy as a rock star, this one as a student, and apparently a white man with torch equals neo-Nazi. However, things tend to change whenever the police gets involved. Because A, not only do they have a gun, but B, they always have to make assumptions and saying, okay, which one is going to create a crime?
For example, black man with gun is often perceived as armed robber, or an immediately deadly threat without any context whatsoever. The guy in question could be the nicest guy on the planet, but if he is seen with a gun, cops instantly respond with the mentality of, this guy is going to shoot someone. This assumption happens quickly and unconsciously. Philandro Castile was stopped in traffic. This was not new. In fact, Castile had been stopped 52 times in the prior 14 years, apparently for the crime of driving while being black. This time it was a broken taillight, but was it? Of the 86 prior minor violations he had been cited for, over half were dismissed by the judge. Philandro Castile was being routinely and repeatedly profiled. He then told the officer that he is a licensed gun owner. When Castile went in to reach for his ID, that's when the cop shot him 6 times. He was a black man with a gun. Tamir Rice was a 14-year-old boy on a swing set playing with a pellet gun when he was killed by cops who mistook it for the real thing. Alton Sterling had the gun in his back pocket when he was stopped by the cops. They pinned him to the ground and shot him dead.
There's more. If you want a more recent example of implicit bias, look no further than Charlottesville, Virginia.
One of the bigger stories that came out of the protests was how the police acted. This is a photo from the protests, which not only is painful to look at, it also proves without a shadow of a doubt that implicit bias exists. How? This is a picture from the Ferguson protests. I would make the argument that the police are taking a much more active role here. Protest about celebrating neo-Nazis. Protest against the shooting of a black teenager. White man protest. Black man protest.
Before we continue, I do want to mention that the cops do have a very hard and dangerous job. I'm not trying to undermine that in any way, shape, or form. I also do hope, want, and understand that we do need an effective police force. But that cannot come at the cost of innocent people dying. So as I was digging into this, I really started having to look at the reasons why this all ends in the exact same way. And one of the reasons I found was in the application of police training. To see what I mean, this is a video that the Seattle Times has done when they did a piece on police training.
We put them through a lot of trials and tests here at the academy, and we try and push them as hard as we can because some people are not cut out to be police officers.
Sir, stop right there. Turn around. Face away.
There, right there. That is the problem. First off, this clip shows off 3 different things. 1, he brandishes his gun first. 2nd, he establishes dominance over his opponent. And 3rd, if his orders are not followed, he most likely can and will shoot.
I must have mentioned that officers are trained in much more than just arresting procedure, of course. They are trained in self-defense, hand-to-hand combat, and even the usage of tasers and pepper spray. One of the biggest things I managed to find, however, is the notion and mentality called escalation of force, which is normally a military term. Think of escalation of force as kind of like the golden rule of guns, is you do not point your gun at someone unless you're planning on destroying them. And I am glad to say that more and more police academies are starting to teach this mentality. However, the problem I managed to find isn't what's taught at the police academies, it's what happens when an officer leaves the academy, goes to their respective police station, and they learn the hard way while changing kind of the things that they have learned in the police academy. Think of it like this. What are you going to retain more? Learning in a classroom that says this is the correct procedure? Or doing a drive-by with your partner going through a bad neighborhood and him telling you, okay, every third person in this black neighborhood is going to want to shoot you. Act first. What are you going to retain more? And then when you're eventually called when one of these black people apparently have a gun and going crazy and they nearly shoot you and you have to stop him, what's that going to create? Implicit bias. So what needs to change? Well, first things first, we need to get rid of the bad apples that exists in police stations all over the country, and then start tightening the standards so that the number of cop shootings can start coming down. The second is, I want to outlaw the action called gypsy cops. Essentially what this is that when cops face internal pressure, what they would do is that they would resign, move to another police station, and be able to resume all their previous practices. So basically what I want to happen is, if you're fired from your job as a police officer or you voluntarily resign, you don't get another shot at being a police officer. And finally, I do want to increase the amount of time that they spend at these police academies, where of course they're being taught on the escalation of force and non-violent ways to deal with violent criminals. And maybe, just maybe, cops around the country will start realizing that black lives really do matter. My name is Max Malik. Thank you for joining me. Good night.